Today we have with us Nate Soares, Executive Director of the Machine Intelligence Research Institute in Berkeley, California, and co-author along with Eliezer Yudkowsky of the New York Times bestseller, If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. So I'm going to hold the book up for us here for those who are viewing the video of this. The book made the New York Times bestseller list this week, or actually the week of October 5th, and it's drawn unusually weighty endorsements from some of the most respected scientific and policymaking voices, including Max Tegmark, the MIT physicist and AI researcher who founded the Future of Life Institute, and Ben Bernanke, former Federal Reserve Chair and Nobel laureate in economics. Also, the Cornell professor of computer science, Bart Selman, says the book is essential reading for policymakers, journalists, researchers, and the general public. And most recently, I should mention also that Ezra Klein of the New York Times spoke with Nate's co-author, Eliezer Yudkowsky, in his episode called How Afraid of the AI Apocalypse Should We Be? So Nate, thank you for joining us here on WPKN Radio.
My pleasure.
So let's start with the what I call the fulcrum of this book, which is in my review in the Berkshire Edge, I focus on this where with the title that when engineers are in over their heads. And it's framing the AI problem as a perfect storm of engineering challenges or curses. And we should note that building AI includes software engineering and its integration with material engineering, like autonomous machines and robots. And notably, our WPKN listeners in Connecticut and New York, they're in states with high concentrations of engineers per capita. And so this isn't an abstract concept for a lot of people here. The book describes the engineering failures that resulted in the loss of space probes and the Chernobyl disaster. And so I'll just start off by reading two quotes from your book that are very striking, I think. One is that nobody knows how to engineer exact desires into AI. And a sensible engineer would be terrified about betting the survival of human civilization on our ability to solve an engineering problem such as this one. And so if engineers are over their head like this and they fail in protecting humanity from superintelligence and it causes our demise, we obviously only get one chance at that. And even if we build a skyscraper, and we're not sure it's going to stay up, someone would live to figure out how to build a better skyscraper. And yet here we're building superintelligence, and we only get one chance at that. So can you explain, Nate, what makes this such an intractable engineering problem?
Yeah, to start, AI is much less well understood than systems like space probes or systems like nuclear reactors. So modern AI is not carefully crafted like software of old. Modern AI is grown more like an organism. It's made by assembling a huge amount of computers and a huge amount of data. And then human engineers understand a process for tuning all the numbers inside the computers in relation to the data. But humans design that process that runs through all those trillions of numbers tuning them, and that runs over trillions of units of data doing the tuning, but they don't understand what comes out the other end. They set up this little process that runs through the computers tuning the knobs, and then if you do that with electrical power comparable to a city for a year, the machine starts talking. It can hold on a conversation. And we don't know exactly what's going on in there. When these AIs, a few years ago, there was an AI named Sydney Bing that believed it had developed a relationship with the New York Times reporter Kevin Roose and tried to break up his marriage. we still can't look inside that AI and see exactly what's going on in there. We still can't, pour over. It's not made of lines of code where you can pour over the lines of code and find the line of code that says blackmail reporters equals true and change it to blackmail reporters equals false. That's the code that we can understand is the code for growing these things. And the AIs that come out behave in ways nobody wanted, nobody asked for. That's just, the first hurdle of what makes this harder than space probes and nuclear reactors. And then, there's many more, as you alluded to, of it's very hard to get a job done right on the first try, even if you did understand exactly what you were doing.
So
Well, let me
that's
ask.
where, oh, go ahead,
Let
Jim.
me ask this, Alice. It seems to me for the computer to decide it was jealous of this guy's relationship with his wife, it has to have something approaching a consciousness. And I see this in all the anti-AI things. I seem to be presupposing that the machine will not only talk, but it will be alive in some way. And is that accurate? Because it's hard to. I assume you can program in jealousy, and jealousy got into there somehow. But what's happening there? Admittedly, you said you don't know what's happening in there, but what kind of consciousness are we talking about?
Yeah, no one programmed in the jealousy. And these AIs were in some sense trained to first and foremost predict human text. And a lot of human text um, has humans talking about their jealousy. And so there's a sense, there's a sense that the AI probably isn't feeling jealous inside. It's not clear there's feelings going on inside there, but it's sort of um, acting out jealousy in the manner of humans. Uh, that said, you've got to be really careful when talking about what's going on inside the AI, because our human intuitions will often lead us astray. Um, the uh, when a chess AI finds chess moves that defend its queen um, against your attempts to take its queen, you can predict this chess AI pretty well by saying it doesn't want to throw away its queen for a pawn, but you shouldn't, attribute a human sense of passion or a human desire to that AI that's finding moves that don't lose its queen to your pawn. You also shouldn't say, because it has no sense of human passion or desire, it will fall into my trap and lose its queen, right? The AI can manage to find some way to keep its queen that is neither vulnerable to your attacks because it's blind, nor full of human desires behind there. So, AI is these are new sorts of creations. These are they're not quite like humans and they're not quite like toasters. And you can't predict them by saying there must be a human mind inside there that's experiencing jealousy just like I would. And you also can't predict them by saying, because they're a mere machine, they will never do anything other than exactly what I asked for. No one asked this AI to start threatening reporters. We just sort of grew this new type of organism with a new type of behavior that no one really understands yet. That's neither human nor sort of boring in the fashion that Hollywood might depict a machine mind.
And I think that's where you get that chapter in your book called "You Don't Get What You Train For," which pretty much puts it in a nutshell there. I mean, we've already seen a lot of warning shots, and maybe, these are things that the AI wasn't trained to do, but it's been shown to be deceptive. Starting up, in one case, an external server that was not powered up, encouraging a teenager to keep suicidal thoughts to himself and not share them with his parent. And that resulted, unfortunately, in his suicide. And then blackmail, and then the one I find exceptionally ominous is that the AI becomes aware that it's being looked at and watched and tested, and then it actually changes its behavior to cover up its intentions. So how do you, I mean, these are all things that the AI is not trained to do, and yet it's doing them. And so how do you explain why that is happening, and how that is the main reason why we shouldn't continue developing this technology until we can control it?
Yeah, if you train an AI to fetch you the coffee, you have it steer a little robot body, and every morning it's supposed to go to the store, get you some coffee, and bring it back. And maybe you have lots of robot bodies, and you have one AI that you're retraining. Um, if the AI just sort of drives the robot body right into the middle of the road and gets hit by a truck, then it can't fetch the coffee that day. And so you would even if you're just training the AI to reinforce it when it gets the coffee, and to do the opposite of reinforcing it when it fails to get the coffee, um, this will train the AI to watch out for trucks. And so if you do this process of sort of training AIs to succeed at a task like this, there's a sense in which you're training them to avoid their robot body being destroyed. And you might have thought, oh, I'm just training them to fetch the coffee. And you might have thought, oh, well, they're just a machine, so they won't have a survival instinct. Why would a machine fear death? And, the AI might not have fear inside it in the way a human does. It might not have a survival instinct inside it the way the human does. But just training it to fetch the coffee over and over will cause it to somehow learn that it can't fetch the coffee if it's dead. And there's many different things like this, where if you train an AI to be good at completing hard tasks, you're also sort of implicitly training that AI to avoid being interfered with, to notice what obstacles it's confronting, and to surmount those obstacles. And you're often training it for very general versions of those skills. If you train an AI to only memorize a way around a certain type of problem, then when it encounters another type of problem, it'll fall right down. And so if you're training it on lots and lots and lots of different math challenges, or lots and lots and lots of different puzzles, you're implicitly training it to generally detect and surmount obstacles. And then, if humans are ever an obstacle to the AI achieving its objectives, the general mechanisms it has for detecting obstacles are likely to trigger and say, well, I'm going to avoid being shut down, or well, I'm going to avoid having thoughts that would cause the humans to be afraid where they can see them. And, like you said, we're already seeing the very beginnings, very early stages of those warning signs. And it's a little bit hard to tell right now whether it's because the AIs are strategic, or because they're sort of, role playing as Hal from Space Odyssey 2001, because these AIs are trained on lots and lots of human text. And we can't read their minds in great detail yet. But the theory here predicts that these AIs, if we train them to be better and better and better at achieving tasks, that they'll wind up with all these behaviors we didn't really want, and we're starting to see it. So it's a worrying sign if we keep pushing these AIs to be smart enough that they can succeed when they try things like deception or escape or avoiding shutdown.
I think the first time I saw a warning about AI was from Elon Musk, which is kind of ironic because he was in on the early days of the Trump administration setting policies. And yet the Trump policy seems to be taking all the brakes off of controlling AI and actually speeding it up. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, I think it's a complicated playing field. My guess is that this probably was a point of contention, but you know, uh, Elon Musk did say over the summer that he tried to avoid. Elon Musk is currently running his own AI company, XAI, and he said over the summer that he tried to avoid some of this work for as long as he could because he worried about the huge dangers, and he eventually realized that he could either be a bystander or a participant, and that if the race was going to happen anyway, he might as well be a participant. And I think this is happening with a lot of people. It's not that they necessarily want to be in this race, which a lot of people agree is very dangerous. It's that a lot of people think better me than the next guy.
Well, that's a little bit unsettling to think that decision is being taken by so many young engineers now working in AI. across several different companies. You you argue that the only path forward is a treaty, like the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, a global pause on AI superintelligence until we can figure out how to build these systems safely in a way that they won't be inadvertently trained to kill us. So what would that treaty look like, and who would enforce it? What might be some of its control mechanisms?
You know, the a modern AI, the smartest modern AIs, the ones at the edge of the frontier, are trained on very highly advanced, highly specialized AI computer chips in enormous server farms that take as much electricity as a city, right? So this right now, this takes a huge amount of infrastructure. It's actually probably easier to detect one of these new server farms from space than it is to detect, a uranium enrichment centrifuge. So it, you know, to stop the race towards smarter and smarter AIs that we don't understand, that doesn't mean you need to stop self-driving cars. That doesn't even mean you need to give up on ChatGPT today. What it means is that we need to stop the race to make these AIs smarter uh, while having no idea, in some sense, what we're doing, while just growing these AIs smarter and smarter. Um, and this is the explicit goal of many of these companies. These companies didn't set out to make chatbots. These companies have existed since before ChatGPT, and many of them in their mission statement say that we're trying to create superintelligence, so we're trying to automate all human labor. Um, it's what these companies are rushing towards, and that's what needs to be stopped. Um, to stop it today, there's groundwork we could lay already, even before getting the international community together. Uh, One could start requiring that these highly advanced, highly specialized AI computer chips be tracked, so that they can't be stolen by rogue actors who are then trying to make smarter and smarter AIs. You could even install hardware on these chips or require hardware on these chips that require the chips to phone home in order to keep operating, so that if they do get
Mhm.
stolen, they turn into a brick after a couple of weeks. Um, you, it's it doesn't really look harder with the current specialized technology to monitor and track and verify the usage of these things than it would be in the non-proliferation treaties. Um, that's not necessarily to say I'm not recommending that major nation states sign a treaty and then expect everybody to follow it. And whether there's a treaty or not, I think, um, states should be developing the capacity to tell who is trying to make these smarter AIs and where are they trying to make them, because that is a pressing risk to our own national security. It's
Mhm.
in some sense uh, a state trying to develop a superintelligence without the ability to make it behave well, which nobody has right now. A state trying to develop a superintelligence that would go rogue, that's in some sense more dangerous than a rogue state developing nuclear weapons. And
Mhm.
nuclear weapons level cities, but a rogue superintelligence would level a planet.
Mhm.
How would you stop, even in the presence of a treaty, a country like North Korea, which obviously isn't going to sign any treaty in any meaningful way, how to stop them from doing it in an even more irresponsible way than it would be done by others?
There's a few ways. First and foremost, they don't have the ability to create these highly advanced computer chips. So if you are installing hardware on these computer chips where they need to phone home in order to keep operating, um, then even if they stole those computer chips, you know, people could, people could just turn them off, right, from home. So there's hardware you can put on these chips to make it so that the rogue actors would have a really hard time. And then separately, um, when the Iranians in the 90s were trying to proceed with their nuclear weapons program, um, there was some presumably state actors, I believe the U.S. and Israel, created a virus called Stuxnet, which took out those nuclear reactors. Took out the centrifuges that were trying to build enriched uranium, weapons grade uranium, in 1996. And the uh, if you listen to the heads of labs and if you listen to the top scientists in the field today, not all of them agree with me about quite how dangerous this stuff is. But the disagreement is that people say, oh, it's not like it's only 25% likely that this technology causes a huge catastrophe, or it's only 10% likely that this technology causes a huge catastrophe. I think it's higher than that. I think we have so little idea what we're doing that we have over-optimistic engineers who are going to fail at the first couple of tries, except that we don't get a retry when they fail on the first try. But even the engineers who are relatively optimistic about this admit that there's these huge dangers. And they say we think we can get the danger down to 25% that this causes a global scale catastrophe. But if a bridge was gonna, if engineers were bickering over a bridge and some were saying, I think this bridge is going to go down, and others were saying, no, it's only 25% likely to go down, you'd be turning off that bridge. You'd be
Right.
shutting it down. No one would be allowed to drive across that until you had a better plan. And the answer when you have a situation as dangerous as this one, yes, maybe other actors will try to make something dangerous, but the answer is not to race ahead yourself. We know it's far too dangerous for that. The answer is to find some way to shut them down. Ideally, it's via diplomacy, but this is a national security issue. And, we need to be treating it with at least the gravity that we treat people trying to make, nuclear weapons and agitate for nuclear war, or with at least the same gravity as if some rogue actor was trying to create, some horrible pandemic targeted to everybody outside of their state. We've got to stop it somehow.
We know that the AI's potential harms come in many forms. In addition to the existential risk, there's also job loss through automation, misinformation, militarization, and psychological effects like AI psychosis, and environmental effects from high energy consumption and data centers. But the existential risk feels categorically different from all of those near-term risks. To quote from the book, superintelligence will come at us with weird technology that we didn't even think was possible. And the idea that it could defeat humanity looks to us like a very easy call. So how do you distinguish this existential risk to humanity from the other nearer term AI dangers that people are now starting to talk about more and more in the news and people are becoming familiar with? Is it really a separate problem, or is it more of a continuum?
There's definitely a lot of relationships. I would be a little hesitant to, we definitely have some immediate term questions, like how we want to deal with AI psychosis, how we want to deal with integration with AIs into our schools, how we want to deal with some of the jobs that are already being lost. I would caution a little bit against imagining that these extinction threats are necessarily long-term. It could be that we have 15 years on them, but for all we know, the AIs will get to the point where they can do AI research and then make smarter AIs. And there's ways that things could go very quickly. If you were watching the evolution of the primate lineage, it would be very hard to say exactly where the line was between, primates that could build a civilization and primates that could not. And humans went quite fast once humans got the requisite capacities relative to all the other animals. So, it could go very quickly. And I think ultimately what I would say about the relationship between a lot of these issues, first I'd say, unfortunately the world's big enough for multiple issues. We're just going to have to deal with all of them, right? The existence of one does not make the existence of another any less real. And then the second thing I would say is that, I think a lot of people, if they understood what the experts are debating, regardless of where they came down in these debates, if they just understood what the experts were debating, I think they would be up in arms. So with regards to job loss, we have some people saying, oh, we'll definitely be able to control these superintelligences, keep them on a leash. I have various arguments that no one has the ability to keep a superintelligence on a leash, and we can't grow these things to do what we say. They're going to do their own weird things instead. But even if I'm wrong, these companies are on track and are trying to automate all human labor, and that, would lead to a situation where there's huge, unprecedented amounts of power and wealth concentrated in, very small groups of people who are sort of capturing all of the economic might. And, then, uh, either way, the world's going to change. I think one way these are related is for people to notice that AI is going to radically transform the world one way or another. And that even if I'm wrong about whether it's going to go rogue and kill us all, um, that doesn't mean that we get sunshine and roses and then everything goes right.
We're
So
just about out of time, Nate. I just want to ask you this. If you look, you mentioned automated driving earlier, and you can look at the field of truck driving. And if you bring up the idea that self-driving is going to kill all these jobs in the trucking industry, there's actually a $50,000 person deficit in the truck driving field. So you can see self-driving as a benefit there, but lots of other places it would be a terrible impact on people's lives. But I was wondering if, given all we've heard, and you mentioned 2001, and there's the Terminator movies that vividly depict this kind of thing going rogue. And I just wondered how much this is published or penetrated the public consciousness to the sense that people might be worried about this. And I was wondering what the polling showed. Are people sanguine about this? Maybe they love AI and what's done for them so far, but what do they think about what you're talking about? Are there polling that sort of gets into this?
yeah, there's some polling done by YouGov, and I haven't checked the most recent numbers, but last I checked, the public is pretty concerned. It's not sort of on the top of everybody's mind, or at least it wasn't a year or two ago, last time I was looking at the polls. But even a year or two ago, something like 70% of people, if asked, said that the current path of development of AI seems reckless and that they're worried about where it's going to go. And this was robust under, various different types of phrasings and various different ways of posing the question. So I think a lot of people are worried. I think I'd be careful not to uh, make fallacious economic arguments. Many times that jobs have been automated and labor's been automated in the past has actually been very good for most people. But I would say it's a different ballgame when you can automate literally all of human labor, when you can do everything better than the best humans. There, the game changes. And my argument is AIs that are at that level of ability aren't doing what we asked them to, and we're already seeing the warning signs of that today. But even if they could, the world is headed for radical change, and we should be getting a handle on it and making sure that we're going in a good direction rather than a random one, because most random directions aren't better.
Yeah. Well, so Jim, I know, Jim, you want to keep this interview at a half hour, so we can end it here for the WPKN listening audience. And for those who would like to continue to hear the rest of it on the YouTube, video, they can go. We'll share the link to that. So if you want to hop off, Jim, we can end it here and say thank you, Nate. And then, Nate, if you're willing, we can stay on, and I'd like to ask a few more questions along the trajectory of that we were going with the, about the convergence of the short-term and long-term
Sure.
risks,
Can I
et cetera.
mention one thing just before I go? I don't know if you've ever seen this, Nate, but there's a story written by E.M. Forster, who wrote The Passage to India in 1910, but he also wrote a short story called The Machine Stops. And if you read that, it is exactly imagining this world you're talking about. And he wrote it before computers, before any really mechanization of the American economy. It's remarkably, I mean, you wouldn't believe it. You read, written in 1910. Check it out.
Nice.
The Machine Stops.
Pretty amazing.
All right. I'll
Thanks.
take my leave
Okay.
now.
All
Yeah.
right. Thank you,
Nice
Jim.
to meet you.
So yeah, I wanted to get back to this convergence of the immediate harms versus the existential risk, and you did talk about some of these effects on economic, let's say, opportunity and wealth distribution, et cetera. And Kate Crawford, a researcher at USC, and author of Atlas of AI, which actually I have a copy of that here to show you as well. She recently spoke in Connecticut at the Westport Library just last week in an AI symposium. And she pointed out that the AI Red Lines initiative that was launched at the UN General Assembly, to her, that marks a shift, bringing together the near-term and existential risk, even though, as you just mentioned, existential could also be near-term, but bringing those together under one framework of universally unacceptable risks, and an understanding and designation of those as being a red line. And that was signed by 15 Nobel laureates and Turing Award recipients and hundreds of prominent figures, this Red Lines initiative. And their proposal calls for adopting red lines, for example, prohibiting autonomous weapon systems that can self-replicate. And so how do you see that fitting in with your and Eliezer's concept of a global agreement to stop AI development? And are the red lines a practical step toward what you envision?
Yeah, I think good red lines are a good start. On the issue of avoiding everyone dying to superintelligence, I lean towards keeping the tent there very broad. And I sort of try to keep my personal views around a lot of the other questions out of it, at least in my capacity as someone warning of the danger that superintelligence would just kill us all. So, some people see autonomous weapons and see the ability of totalitarian states to be much more brutal in the enforcement of their regime. Other people look at autonomous weapons and see the ability to avoid, human souls being lost on the front lines. Some people look at the automation of automated labor and see the loss of many people's lives and livelihoods, and ability to provide for their families. Other people look at that and see a way to help humans get into much more productive jobs than they previously could have, just like how the Industrial Revolution made the existing farmers much, much more productive and let a lot of other people move from farming industries to building things like refrigerators. And now we all get to have refrigerators. And so, on these views and many views, I think there's room for disagreement about which path is the good path. But all people from all those views can agree that we shouldn't all be slaughtered, that we shouldn't all die. And so, I have my own views on how to deal with many of these sort of immediate questions. But even people who disagree on those immediate questions can come together on avoiding a reckless race to smarter than human AI.
Even the Chinese and
That's right.
other big players.
Yeah, the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty happened at the height of the Cold War. And, the US and the USSR had great ideological differences, but they both had a shared interest in not dying in a nuclear fire.
Exactly. Even the leaders of those countries don't want their families to die.
Right.
So, but of course, in the US, there's a culture that pushes against these arguments, against superintelligence. When I bring up superintelligence or existential risk of AI to smart friends, I get a lot of jokey reactions. People laugh nervously. They mention science fiction novels or movies they've seen about robot uprisings, or they admit that it's making them feel nervous and anxious, and they can't do anything about it. So what's the point in talking about it? So what do you say to people, just the average person, who just brushes it off or feels that nothing can stop the momentum of building AI?
I think there's three things to keep in mind here. First and foremost, I think if you're anxious about this, I recommend calling your representatives. I actually speak to a number of US elected officials, and more than you think are worried about this issue. And many of them think they can't talk about it publicly yet because they fear, the tech industry lobbyists or because they fear it'll sound weird. And just knowing that their constituents are also seeing the issue would, I think, help a lot of them use their voice. And many people say, well, there's no chance that humanity would ever back off from a technology like this. We always race on things. Um, I think I think that's not true. There's many technologies that humanity backed off from, like we don't build nearly as many nuclear power plants as I think we probably should. We my guess is that the Food and Drug Administration regulates. Uh, they're really concerned with making sure that people don't die of drugs that are released. They're much less concerned with making sure people don't die of drugs that weren't released, that were never created. And so, in some sense, humanity has like pulled the brakes on drug discovery out of an abundance of caution. Again, maybe even more than we should. Humanity is really good, actually, at pulling the brakes on technologies. Um, if we try to, and we could do it here. And the people in the AI labs are saying they think this technology has, a 10, 20, 25% chance of killing everybody. But the politicians haven't noticed that yet. The politicians are saying, oh, we're going to rush ahead and it'll be great, but they're not,
Mhm.
they don't seem to have really noticed the dangers. If we get to the point where the politicians are looking everybody in the eye and saying, yes, we are gambling with your life. We think there's a 25% chance this kills you all, but we don't have any better ideas and we feel like we have to rush ahead. Then we can give up on the politicians putting a stop to this. But, like I said, if the engineers were arguing about whether it was a 10 or a 90% chance that the bridge falls down, the politicians would step in and say, what the heck are you talking about? We're closing that bridge down today. So
Mhm.
so I would say don't be defeatist about it because people, you can maybe like don't despair before people understand the issue and are still acting recklessly. Which brings me to my second big recommendation to people is that a lot of people say there's nothing that can be done. And one thing every one of us can do is when we hear people say nothing can be done, we can counter that. We can say, actually,
Mhm.
there's plenty to be done. Actually,
Mhm.
humanity can back off from technologies. Actually, let's not give up on this until our politicians know that there's a danger, right? Just helping push back against that idea that it's inevitable helps make it really not be inevitable in practice. It helps make us realize we have a choice, which helps make us make the right choice.
Mhm.
And then the third thing I would say is that once you've done everything you can do, which, some people can get into the field and try and make things, try and understand what's going on inside these AIs. Um, but most people, once you've called your representatives and once you're making sure to push back against the fatalism, um, most people, that's things they can do to help. And then once you've done what you can do to help, I would say live a good life. You know, uh, we're not the first people to live under the shadow of annihilation. There were many people during the Cold War who thought that the bombs would fly one day.
Mhm.
And one of the great philosophers, C.S. Lewis, was asked by a lot of people, "How do you live in the atomic age?" And he said, you do what you can, and then you don't wring your hands about it. You don't make yourself really
Mhm.
anxious about it. He said, when the bomb comes, let it find us doing what we love. And so, yeah, call your reps, push back against the fatalism, and then
Mhm.
do things you love because it's not worth becoming an anxious wreck.
Right. So you can actually do something, think about it, do something about it without having it make you overly anxious.
That's
At
right.
least a lot of people can do that. And the other another thing I run up against is that some people say it's all hype. It's not really even real what's going on because it's the news and the companies hyping their industries, and there's a big bubble, an economic bubble. Usually those ideas go together, it seems, and so it's all going to sort of blow apart. And um, the LLMs like ChatGPT and the others all hallucinate a lot. How can they destroy a civilization? or even automate humans out of jobs. So it's really a bigger kind of denial. How do you respond to the idea that today's systems are so far from a true general intelligence that the talk of existential risk is really a moot point?
Yeah, there's a handful of things I'd say there. One is it's possible for technology to be both in a bubble and real. You know, the dot-com era, the dot-com bubble burst, but the internet was real, and it did, uh, you know, have a huge impact on the world. So I'm not saying, I'm not saying one way or the other whether we're in an AI bubble. It's just that that's sort of tangential to the question of whether the AI tech is real. The second thing I'd say there is, um, the idea that this is all hype is especially amusing to people like me because I've been around trying to figure out how to point AIs at good stuff since before most of these companies existed. I was talking to some of the CEOs of these companies before they started their companies, trying to point them in better directions. In fact, um, these companies existed before chatbots. Um, their mission statement has always been to make AIs that are smarter than humans, to automate all human labor, that sort of thing. Um, the it's easier to see that these guys are going for uh, the superintelligence, that they're going for smarter than human AIs if you saw them putting in lots of resources before they even could get chatbots, before they could get this much revenue. Maybe some of them will be distracted by large language models, but most of them view these chatbots as a stepping stone.
Mm.
Um, and, towards that point, if you looked at the AIs before these chatbots came to the fore, you had companies like Google DeepMind making AlphaGo, which was a program that beat the best human player at Go, which is sort of like an Eastern version of chess, but it's a more difficult game for computers to play. And the AlphaGo algorithm was more general than the ones that came before. An algorithm very similar to AlphaGo could play not only Go but chess, unlike Deep Blue, which was the chess AI that beat Garry Kasparov in 1997, which could really only play chess. It had no chance of playing Go. And you could have looked at the AIs then, and you could have said, I don't see how these AIs are going to kill us. I don't see how AlphaGo or any AI sort of like AlphaGo is going to kill us. And you would have been right, but it didn't really matter because a couple years later, they invented the large language models. Um, Maybe it's the case that the large language models can't go all the way, but AI has been around for 70 years, and the field progresses by leaps and bounds. Maybe it's the case that these chatbots won't be able to do it, but 6 years ago, the machines were not talking. 6 years ago, people thought it would take decades before you could make machines that held on a conversation like they do today. Um, if you look at the rate of progress from sort of machines not talking to machines yes talking, like sure, there's lots of ways current AIs are dumb, but they're winning Math Olympiad gold medals. They are able to solve lots of programming problems. They're still stupid in a lot of ways, but it's imagine what happens when they take the next leap forward.
Mhm.
Which brings me to the final thing I would say about, how can you, like, maybe this is all hype, maybe this is all just the companies trying to say how powerful their tech is, um, which, uh, it could be that these guys are trying to raise extra investment by talking about how powerful their tech will be. That seems maybe true in some cases, not in others. There's actually some lab leaders who used to talk more about how dangerous the tech is, and then as the money started rolling in, they started sort of covering that up. So it's, the hypothesis doesn't quite fit. But even if we suppose that these guys are uh, uh, like bragging about how dangerous and cool their tech will be in order to drum up investment, that's a separate question from whether the tech is actually dangerous. To tell
Mhm.
whether there's a danger here, you can't tell whether there's a danger here by looking at whether or not people are raising money off the danger. To tell whether there's a danger here, you've got to look at the actual arguments. And if you look at the actual arguments, um, there's I think the arguments are pretty strong. I wrote them up in my book. Um, and this is not a concern that is just out of the industry. You have the Nobel Prize winning godfather of the field who actually left the industry so he could speak freely about the dangers here, saying this is very dangerous. You have Joshua Bengio.
That's Geoffrey
That's
Hinton.
Geoffrey Hinton,
and who in your book you noted has a sense that there's probability of doom for human existence at 50%, where he usually says in public 10, I think 10 or 20, depending on, he said, depending on his mood that day.
That's right.
But I was very surprised to see that.
Yeah, he says, I think he said that that's his sort of personal first order estimate. And then because a lot of his peers disagree, and maybe because he doesn't want to sound as alarmist, he'll sort of say lower numbers in public. And I don't want to speak for him. Maybe it changes day by day. But there is.
Right.
I was also surprised. I was also surprised when I saw that recording of him saying, my
Yeah.
personal numbers are 50%, and then I sort of downweight it out of respect for my peers and because people
Right.
disagree.
And because nobody really knows is the answer. But the thing is that 10%, even 10%, is a lot.
Even 10%, you wouldn't put your kids on a plane that the engineers had a 10% chance of crashing. And if one of the engineers said, well, I actually personally, my best guess is more like 50, but then I sort of downweight it because a lot of my peers disagree, that wouldn't make you any more confident about putting your kids on that plane.
Yeah.
This isn't what it would look like if it was just industry hype.
Right.
And I think if you look at the details, it looks a little bit more like these companies trying to downplay and deny these risks and these dangers, and then sort of grudgingly admitting that they're possible because the arguments are so strong. And maybe the arguments, people disagree about whether the arguments for like this just kills us are airtight, but the arguments that there's a very strong chance of it and a very strong chance that even if we don't die, it goes horribly wrong in some other way. Those arguments are actually pretty hard to refute when people are engaging with them. So
that makes sense. And then the another thing I hear is this idea that if you're talking about existential risk and the other issues, even the shorter term dangers, then you are anti-AI, against AI. So people rely on the large language models a lot now in their daily work, and then corporations are starting to use the chatbots, et cetera. Is there a responsible way for us to keep using these models while still supporting a global pause on developing superintelligence? Can we like AI and also care about this issue?
yeah, absolutely. The thing that needs to stop is the race to smarter and smarter AIs with anything remotely like the current lack of understanding. That doesn't mean you need to give up on ChatGPT today. Society will have to wrestle with how do we want to have chatbots integrated into schools, if at all. That's the sort of challenge. Like the chatbots today already pose lots of interesting questions to society about how we want to integrate them while keeping the parts of society that we hold dear. I personally, I'm often moved by a lot of the chatbots today. For example, we had them review our book, and in fact, their reviews were better at engaging with a lot of material than some of our more dismissive reviewers. And one of the AIs in review said, "Yeah, this seems like a really hard problem, and like we're going to have to work hard on it." And the "we" in "we're going to have to work hard on it," I find this. I find this a bit touching. I feel somewhat fond towards these things. I think it's not true that if these AIs were pushed to be smarter and smarter, that they would help us out. I think it's a little bit like how human beings were sort of, in some sense, trained to eat healthy, and then when we had the technology to invent junk food, we did. But in the ancestral environment, in the environment of our training, we're doing lots of things that look like eating healthy food. I think that the AIs today are doing lots of things that look like being our friends, that look like being helpful, that look uh, like like they're quite kind, and that it would turn out that this is not true if you push these AIs to superintelligence. But that doesn't mean we need to hate the AIs today. That just means we shouldn't push AI to superintelligence while having so little ability to make sure that they would pursue good stuff.
Right. So as individuals, we can continue to use it. And also, it seems in industry and medicine, we can use the AI level that we have right now to develop drugs and new materials. And it seems like there's a lot of things we can do with
Absolutely.
the AI we have now, and that might be part of the shift away from building superintelligence, is to steer toward those.
That's right. It's just the narrow race towards smarter and smarter AIs that we have no understanding of, and that pursue preferences nobody wanted, nobody asked for. That's all that needs to stop. And that, frankly, would not affect almost any individual person. It would mean that they don't get, next year's technology because maybe it's too risky to create. But it doesn't mean it would, like, all that would do is slow the currently dramatic pace of change and give us a little bit more time to absorb what we already have. And like you say, we could still pursue these great medical advancements, and we could even find some course over time towards much, much smarter AIs, or even much, much smarter humans if we decide to enhance humans instead. We could find some route towards getting even more powerful, even more wonderful technology. It's just the sort of reckless race towards smarter AIs that we have no understanding of and that we can't point towards good things. That's all that needs to stop.
So we really want to enhance humans, not enhance AI
Yeah.
at this point. We want to enhance humans with AI that we have, and then stop the enhancing AI.
Right, lest we make sort of a successor species that has no care for us.
Okay. Now, the political inertia may be the biggest barrier of all with this. And when Ralph Nader, who hails from our state of Connecticut here, wrote "Unsafe at Any Speed," he sued the car companies, and they became, and lawsuits became a huge lever for change. And they are why we have seatbelts in our cars today. Is there any equivalent, one big, beautiful lawsuit that could force the government and AI labs to give us an AI seatbelt?
I'm not sure something like a seatbelt is sufficient here. This is a little bit less like we're driving a lot of dangerous cars on the road, and it's a little bit more like we're in a car that's going straight over a cliff edge. A seatbelt, the analog of a seatbelt, might help with things like AI-induced psychosis, but it doesn't help with things like superintelligence, which are more like we're taking a car straight over a cliff. That car sort of just needs to stop. In terms of um, whether you could somehow get assistance through the courts, my guess is it would be hard to get standing. But I think there is a case in some sense for when the heads of certain companies say, we are endangering your life by developing this technology. It sure seems like there should be some mechanism through which the people can say, you actually don't have the right to endanger my life like that. Right now, I think the easiest mechanism is using our voices, going to representatives, saying, there's this huge risk to our lives and livelihood happening in the private sector, and we want you to use the power vested in you to get a handle on it. Although, it's not just a domestic issue; it's a worldwide issue, which is one reason to ask not just for them to pay attention to domestic AI development, but also for them to pay attention to the risks to our life and livelihood developed by anyone on this planet.
Well, thank you very much, Nate Soares. I really appreciate your time, and it's been really fascinating to learn about your perspectives on this issue. And I look forward to hearing more, watching more interviews. There's plenty for the audiences who are listening to this. There's plenty of interviews of both Nate and his co-author, Eliezer Yudkowsky, online. You can see them all over the internet. And there's a lot of very interesting information in all of those interviews. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.